Hey, last in line. Welcome to another episode. We are locking down on conquering our enemy for the hot summer, July and August. Conquering the enemy, the narrative, the masculinity, and the elevation. And this has been an awesome series to do. I've had a blast. Man, I've had some great guests, and today is no different. I'm going to introduce to you Lincoln Lawing, who is currently the president and founder of, and I hope I say this right, Asaph Talks.
That's right, baby. You
Asaph
got it.
Talks. And he is, it's a 501c3 nonprofit. And what I love about this is he come alongside ministers and coaches and athletes, and he really tries to lock arms and sort of just disciple and love on and coach and encourage these groups, these people, these leaders. Man, he's just pouring into people, investing in people. The current adversity that I might be in, just again, discipleship in Jesus and uncovering some of their purpose. And man, he speaks at different kinds of events. He's youth events, men's retreats. Man, this guy's all over the map. Attended University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Began a career with Fellowship of Christian Athletes back in 2011 and served until just recently in February of this year, I guess. And in 2013 was licensed and ordained as a minister. Congrats on that. Lives in Charlotte currently with his wife and children. Formally welcoming Lincoln Lawing to the show.
Hey, glad to be here. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Man, it's awesome to get to meet new people. And man, just in the brief times we've talked and just some research I've done on your ministry and your business, man, you're doing some awesome stuff out there. And I can just see the authenticity, genuine in you and your voice. Like I just know you're out there making an impact. So anything about you personally, though, that maybe I'd have left out on the bio that you kind of want to connect with the audience a little bit on?
Hey, a couple things about me personally. I tell people all the time, so I've got two daughters. They are 7 and 8. And I had brothers, so I don't know what I'm doing with the daughters, man. I love it. I'm having a blast, but I think I know, I've been married 10 years, got two daughters. I think I know less about women now than I did 10 years ago. Having a blast, love it. But, hadn't played in a long time, but I'm a baseball guy through and through. I love all sports, but I do a lot of ministry around baseball. And I guess on a random note, I do have a lifelong pursuit. I am interested in finding a Bigfoot at some point in life. I want to go out and start. There's got to be one somewhere, and I want to go find him. So that's kind of a little personal. I hope you don't think I'm crazy, but
I'm glad you said that because, doing some research on your website, talk to me about this YETI hunting that you came up with. And I don't know if that's yours or if that's a common saying out there or what.
So it is. And so it's always been a joke, not a joke as far as, I don't necessarily know if there's a Bigfoot out there or not, but I've talked about it enough. And when I started this YETI hunting, and I joke, I put hunting instead of hunting.
Right.
Because I feel like when it comes to finding your true passion and your true purpose in life, if you really find out what that is and you go for it, a lot of people tell you it's not there. You'll never find it, and you're crazy for going for it, kind of like they would if you were hunting an actual YETI. So that's kind of a lot of the speaking that I do. I've got some format and stuff I do, just finding out what your YETI is and going and hunting it, man. And everybody's going to think you're crazy, but hey, I'd rather die looking for something that I knew God called me to than sit on the sidelines. So that's just a little bit of a small intro on the YETI hunting that I do, just some of the talks that I do.
Yeah, that's cool. No, that's awesome. And I know there's a lot of people out there that fit into that little box of what you just described, wanting to hunt it, but a little bit afraid, a little bit uncertain. But man, as we dive in, we're going to talk about some words here that are a little bit polarizing, you might say, in society right now. There's some controversy around everything right now, obviously. But when we talk about the enemy, we've got certain narratives in our life that we've locked into and believed for so long that have become sort of our enemy, if you will, and have gotten in the way of what we think God's got us doing in the right narrative about our life. So, man, talk about your own personal experiences, maybe your journey a little bit, and some of the false narratives maybe that you slipped into believing.
For me, I think that's big as I've peeled the layers back. Being in a former athlete, a coach, a leader, there's a lot of performance based in there. You slip into, you're way more focused on what you do as opposed to who you are. And the narrative that kind of became dominant in my life that led to a lot of destruction, and I still battle with, is you're only as good as what you produce today, right? And so it's like every day you want to take your resume and show it to God and others and say, did I do good today? Did I do good today? And on the good days, which are rare, you feel good. And then on the bad days, you feel bad. And as I've unpacked, I've had some addiction and things in my past, and over the last 11 years of being sober and unpacking that, had a counselor tell me something real good one time. He said, Lincoln, you kind of metaphorically give everybody a sticky note at the end of the day and say, hey, write your opinion on here of me. How'd I do today? And he said, and you take all those in and you collect them. And then based on that, you form your opinion of yourself. And he said, and I thought about that. So for me, I think approval addiction, being in ministry, you always want to make people happy. You always want to perform. And that's kind of a narrative how I was affected by others. I really don't know where it came from. I had good parents and they loved me, but I think a lot of it was just playing ball, coaching, being in performance-based work. You're just kind of always on the treadmill of what does everybody think? How do they think I'm doing? And that's kind of one of the things I fight with.
Yeah, that's a good answer. That's, it's a lot of people can relate to that. And I'm a baseball guy too. My kids play, and man, anytime you're in a competitive environment like that, like you said, performance based, like we allow kind of other people to write our story, or the outcome of that competition to write our story. And what it sounds like to you, to me about you and what other people I know are dealing with or have dealt with is, man, it's a ebb and flow. I mean, it's a daily grind as to, am I going to measure up today? And that's a hard battle. That's a hard narrative to swallow, but I've heard somebody say, fire the narrator. Whenever we start talking about some of these people, let's go through and let's kind of vet out some of this noise, if you will, and get back to baseline, and getting the word and get with God and get right there. And sounds like you did that. And it sounds like you had that transformation. How were you able to kind of establish that baseline and get into center of where you needed to be with your faith, and maybe a little bit about that journey?
It takes a lot of discipline and repetition. I think I fall into the trap of thinking that, there's an easy way to do things, regardless of what it is. Like, hey, if I go to this conference or read this book, then I'll be transformed. And what I've learned is, knowledge always outweighs obedience. I think we always know what to do. It's just a matter of daily executing that. And I think establishing that baseline started, just some simple scripture for me, but just Romans 8:1, where it says therefore no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. I mean, I grew up in performance-based, a little bit legalistic, religious background, and at least how I interpreted it. So I think when I finally got to the point where, man, God knows everything that I've done and that I'm going to do, and he loves me, and really basking in that daily and letting it rewire the way that I thought, because I believe that, thoughts lead to emotions that lead to behavior. And so for me, it was just daily doing that. And when I did get off course, not basking in that, trying to be, I've learned to operate more in the gray area than black and white thinking all the time. Some things are black and white. A lot of things aren't. And realizing that if I'm not perfect, it's okay. So just understanding that God thought more highly of me than I was thinking of myself. And if God was telling me one thing, then who am I to say otherwise? So that was a big one, I think, for me, was just getting that baseline and, listening to the right people, having people in my life. You want accountability, you want discipline, you want transparency, but picking a few people that you want to listen to, and hearing what they have to say, and kind of silencing everybody else. I think, Dabo Swinney, I know you're out in Texas, here in North and South Carolina. Everybody loves some Dabo Swinney, but he said,
love Dabo, man.
Yeah. And he said, I would never take I'll never listen to criticism from somebody I wouldn't take advice from. And he had a good point. Most of the people that I was letting write a negative narrative in my life were people that I really didn't care what they thought. So for me, I started thinking, man, limiting the voices, limiting the noise, and ultimately letting God dive into that narrative. And
Yep.
the, you know, kind of the other thing is embracing failure. The more you do life and you do things that are worthy, the more you're going to fail. That comes with the turf. So learning to see failure as opportunity and not an ultimate failure. That's why I love baseball. I mean, you're going to get another at bat regardless of how bad you look on that curveball in the dirt you swung at.
Hey, and there's a lot of people in Cooperstown that failed about 70% of the time at the plate. You know what I mean? So it's a failure sport for sure. But so when you talk about some of that and we get into that theme of conditional love, conditional acceptance that we're faced with in society, you know, it can come and go, and it's based on, like we talk about, it's very conditional, whereas opposed to God is unconditional, that agape love. You know, how do we, or I guess a better question would be like, what can disrupt some of our, I don't know, the rhythm that we get into? Let's say you're talking to a guy that's in that rhythm. He's found his cadence, right, of his narrative. Like he feels like he's right in that swim lane, and yet still getting kind of knocked around by some of the external, some of the noise, some of the voices, because there are people that he does respect their opinion, let's say, but sometimes that significance or affirmation isn't always there. What do we do as guys to press through that? Or what do we do as guys to almost kind of deflect it if we need to?
And I'd agree with that, because I think, you know, when we talked about what disrupts that cadence, I mean, you know, the obvious is, you know, failure can disrupt it. Success can disrupt it. I'm a big believer in a weird way that monotony and mundaneness sometimes can disrupt that. A friend of mine, we talk a lot about the monotony of success when you know what you're doing is working. But sometimes you got so used to chaos, when you don't feel it, you don't know what to do. And so for me, I think when I get kind of what helps me get back into that is margin. I've learned to embrace margin in my health, in my time, in my finances, because when there's always noise and you never get a time to focus on what that narrative is, then it's going to be dictated by your schedule or tight finances or a lack of time. And I've just learned over the years in relationships and in my inner man, deep in my soul, that margin is a really good thing. A lot of the greatest successes, ideas, affirmations in my life have come in times of margin. So I've kind of worked it into my rhythm when I'm getting off base, when I'm getting off kilter, or even better, proactively before that happens, get away, withdraw, and not like in an isolation, but man, just spend some time alone, thaw out. I mean, you can't believe everything you think, which is weird. So it's just saying, hey, what have I been thinking about? What's going on? And just kind of pulling back and saying, does this line up with the narrative? Is what I'm thinking true? And it's really helped me a lot just in implementing pieces of margin, small ones in the day, bigger ones throughout the week, even bigger ones throughout the year, has really been big for me to keep that narrative on track.
Man, that's awesome. I like that a lot. I like margin, man. And we hear anybody that's successful talks about intentionally carving that out, like making that a scheduled event, schedule nothing, put that in the calendar, schedule a gap, because I think you're right onto something, because you can really lock in and get real vertical when you need to, and just press into the Lord and figure out kind of direction, and that peace just kind of saturates you in that moment of margin. And I like that. So, man, as we kind of creep into this conquering our enemy, and we're going YETI hunting today for the enemy that's trying to track down and kind of rip apart our masculinity, as we're on the M of the N.M.E. Man, we could go wherever we want to go with this topic. There's so many directions given the climate we're in, with social media, with feminism at its highest point, or political disruption at its highest point, trying to kind of creep in and rebrand this word we call masculinity. tell us what you think biblical masculinity is either defined as, or what you think it just looks like. What's a picture of what masculinity was designed to be?
So I heard this a few weeks ago, actually, before I even knew about this question, and I've heard a lot of definitions. I love this piece because I believe that the enemy's biggest tactic, not the N.M.E, the enemy is in Satan, is getting men off track and creating chaos in the family unit. And I just think about it a lot, do a lot of ministry around it, deal with coaches and athletes. And it's crazy. No matter how successful a man is, he still battles with this. And a guy said at this conference I was at, he said, if we're created in the image of God, and which we agree on, he said, then it would want us to know what was kind of God's first order of business. And he went back to Genesis 1, and he said the earth was formless and void, and then God began to create things. And he said God's image is to move into an environment of chaos and create order. And I was like, wow. And he said, as men, when we're operating in our true design, I'm not trying to define masculinity here or necessarily, there's a lot of people smarter than me that have a better definition. But biblically, if you look throughout, I think the character of God bestowed upon us as men is when we see things on this earth that are chaos and not order, our godly, manly task to do is to enter that chaos and bring order to it with giving the honor to the image of God. And that's kind of how I began to sum it up over. I've thought on that a lot. So
that's real good. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And what better time than right now, if you look around, would order need to be restored, And so that's why I think it's important. And there's a lot of people talking about this now and has been for years, but the masculinity piece can be skewed and warped and twisted into whatever, not to mention narrative again, but narrative somebody else wants to create, right? So whatever fits a political agenda or whatever perpetual propaganda is out there, that we want to spin the word masculinity. But like you said, let's make it simple. Let's boil it down to what God, who made us, called it to be, right? We weren't ever confused with our gender. We weren't, back in the day, we weren't ever confused with our role as a provider, as a hunter, as a gatherer, as a protector. So somehow it got skewed. Somehow we got a little bit off course. What would you say the culture, effects the culture's had so far on it, to this point? Obviously it's happened over time, gradually. We've gone off of plumb line somewhere. So what effects, if you can think of a few that maybe you see being the triggers for masculinity getting kind of caught off guard here?
I think the main thing is silenced what it is at its core. I think that the culture through whatever means have taken away from the things that God wants us to do, necessarily devalued that. And I think what it does is, in today's culture, people would rather err on the side of caution by not doing something than do it and mess up. And 100%. So I think what it's done is it's created passivity. And I'm not saying you need to confront everything. There's a balance. But I was at a men's event a while back, and one of the best clips I ever saw about manhood, they showed it was Saving Private Ryan. And at some point in the movie, a guy, his comrade is in the building, and he watches the enemy go in. He doesn't do anything, and that guy kills his partner. And it was the whole thing of that. That's kind of where we are. And I believe in manhood, the biggest mistakes we make aren't the things we do. It's the things that we don't do that we should have done. And I believe what the culture's done is created a cautious environment where there's too much passivity among us as men, and that needs to be balanced. But that's what I think it's done. So a lot of times we see the chaos and we know something's wrong, but we've been trained through the culture not to go in and do something about it, or we think that it's someone else's job, when in reality it's what God's called us to do. And I think that's what I see a lot, not a lot of men making grave mistakes as much as the passivity. And you know this, when you know God's called you to action and you do not act, it becomes almost poison inside of you. And I think that's what leads to a lot of the acting out and things of that nature.
Yeah, for sure. No, 100% agree. And I would even ask you too, with all the work you're doing with, athletes and coaches and leaders throughout in ministry, even and not, but what would you say to a group of those folks, or what do you say in part of your, some of your coaching, if you cover this piece and maybe just indirectly covering masculinity? The standards have been sort of, I guess, misdefined. I think the culture and the society has taken the standards, we've watered them down long enough to where we've accepted it, right? Like now, like you're talking about, passivity is sort of accepting things the way they are. And what would you recommend to these guys that you're coaching and walking alongside in ministry? How do we take that step to have a voice to start change?
I think it starts with knowing that the power and responsibility that's been bestowed upon us from our Creator. I mean, I think it all starts from a vertical standpoint, and realizing it's not about not being masculine. It's about learning when and where to flex that. I know in John Eldredge's book, Wild at Heart, he talked about a scalpel. He said, a scalpel is created to save lives, but it could also kill somebody used the wrong way. He said, you don't dull the scalpel because you may need it to save a life. You just keep it in the case until the proper time. And I think that's one thing that is understanding, hey, we've been given power and gifts and influence as men, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's learning how and when and where to flex those. And I just think that understanding that God loves us and he's proud of us, before we ever do anything. I think that's one thing I talk to guys about, when Jesus was baptized and the Father said, "This is my son whom I'm loved. Listen to him." He had not done anything yet. He had not had any miracles performed or anything. So the biggest thing I tell these guys, once you get secure in who you are as a man and who the Father has created you to be, then that overflows into your relationships and into society. So I'm a big believer that getting very clear on who God is and what his purpose is for you as a man then gives you confidence to carry it out in your design.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And it goes beyond just talking about it, right? It's more about being about it. And then once you are walking in that and people see that in you, it becomes magnetic, right? People start gravitating toward you and wanting to be a part of that movement, if you will, that is kind of out there, that's starting to, I think, get more traction, is this masculinity in its right standing. I think we're taking those steps to get it back. And, you've got daughters, I've got sons and a daughter. This is off script. I'm going to throw this at you, put you on the spot. But so aside from being a godly man, what are you going to tell your daughters to look for? Like, what is going to be the guy that you hope, what's that going to look like from a masculinity standpoint? Like, what in your opinion, just a couple things? I'm sure there's a long list. If you're like me, there's a list that's endless that no one will ever live up to. But aside from that, maybe a couple.
Yeah, I always joke. I tell them, as much as I love baseball players and playing ball, I say, I don't know if I want you guys dating baseball players, because I know what those guys are about. But, I think for me, I've told my wife, what I would like to do is, from now as they get older, I want to be able to model what they should look for. And that's the biggest thing for me, is I want them to be able to understand the full scope of masculinity. It is being able to provide and being able to protect. But one thing I'm very passionate about is having daughters, is learning the emotional connection, the transparency, the vulnerability. So I think the biggest thing if you summed it all up, I would want them to be with someone who's authentic and who's the true person. Because I think in today's world, especially inundated with social media, you don't really know who somebody is. And I think I've told them and my wife, I just want them to be with somebody that's authentic. What you see is what you get. And the person he is with you is the same person he is in different pockets of relational influence. I think that's a valuable and decreasing characteristic among people today.
Yeah, for sure it is. Yeah, that's a great way to describe it too. And it's the modeling part that stood out to me when you're talking is how are we modeling that? Because that will be caught by them more than taught if we're just speaking the words of here's what you need to look for. They need to see that in us. And I think that's a great point. All right, man. So let's transition right in here to what I call the last portion of N.M.E, the elevation. And, we've got two contexts here of elevation. And I want to cover the first one being, and, competitive sports, high level athlete, successful athlete, out doing it, grinding. It's easy to probably get caught in that elevation trap, right? Of inflate ourselves because we're trying to be on the top of that mountain. Like we're competing, we're fighting, we're playing a hard sport. So we're at the top of the mountain and we're pumping our fists. But talk about it. What are some of the downfalls to that? Obviously, there are some. And what can that lead to if it starts to get in a dark place and spiral out of control?
I believe, some of the biggest downfalls I've seen from leaders, athletes, coaches, pastors are when they get to a place where nobody can tell them anything. I mean, it's just one of the big, and I think when you begin to elevate yourself to a point, it's a dangerous place to be because, it's saying a lot of people go the flip side and they're the constant martyr. They're saying everybody's better than me. Woe is me. And that's not humility. I heard a guy say the humility is not an under view of yourself. It's an accurate view of yourself. And so I tell people, I believe, we hear a lot about, man, that guy's self-made. He did it. He's there are no self-made. I mean, I think everybody has to have help somewhere, somehow. Even if they did it themselves, they were given an opportunity to prove themselves. So I think them realizing that it's only like when I think about myself, I'm only the product of God working in me and the people that he's placed in my life. So I think the trap you fall into when you don't listen to anybody, you get to a place as humans, we can justify any thought that comes in our mind. Absolutely. And I think one of the traps you get into is you think that you're above the crowd or you're better than the crowd or the rules don't apply. And that's a bad place to be. And what you can do there is, I tell guys all the time, you don't want your skills to be able to take you to a place that your character can't keep you, right? So it's short-lived. And kind of tell them one of the little mantras I have, don't let your outer man take you somewhere your inner man can't keep you. So it's a tough place to be. And I think I've seen a lot of people when they get to that place where there's isolation and there's nobody, they're not letting people speak into them. They fall. And it's even worse because at that point they have a bigger influence than they did before they got there.
That's right. That's right. And coachability. I hear you talk about being coachable, and I don't think we ever outgrow that. And I know for sure in the sports world, if you think you've outgrown that, then that's when I think your digression starts to happen. So, well, all right. So are you dealing with top performers, you're coaching folks. I mean, what are you given that is there a piece of this elevation that, or do you see it being common? And then do you kind of get them in check? And is it hard to get guys in check? Is it hard for them to kind of trust somebody else to kind of hold them accountable? I mean, is that a barrier from the people that you work with?
Absolutely. And it's funny because most top performers in the business world, athletes, coaches, most of them understand accountability and discipline because I'm not saying everybody that's successful played sports at some time, but most did. So they understand that. But getting people to be transparent, vulnerable, and accept accountability is one of probably the hardest things that I do. I mean, even for me, like I have 24/7, 360 accountability, but I don't always like it. I don't like letting people in, but it's kind of like working out. You don't necessarily have to love it. You're doing it for the results. And I
Right.
think that it is hard, but I think once people taste and understand that with that accountability and with that discipline, that's where freedom comes from. And with the nonprofit and ministry things that I do, there's a lot of different eyes on money, statistics, all these things. And I love that because I can sit across from the table from somebody and say, hey, you might not like what you see, you might not like what you get, but it's the truth. There are no secrets. And I think accountability is one of those things. People don't like it, they don't welcome it, but once they see the benefits of it, it's I don't want to say addicting, that's the bad word, but it's almost like, man, this works. This is there's a freedom that comes when you're going through something and somebody else knows it and they hold you accountable to it. Your inner soul, it's like something is unlocked deep within. And there's a freedom that comes with that. And but it is hard because it's amazing to me. A lot of people have made it very far, and other than themselves, not many people know much about them at all. Don't know where their weaknesses are, and don't know where their strengths are. And I think that's where it's, hey, in leadership and advancement in your craft, what got you from there to here won't always get you from here to there, so to speak. So I see that a lot.
And I call that, the blind spots and the blind spot brotherhood of having those people in your life because let's face it, if you have them in the right places, they can really kind of ignite your growth because you don't get complacent. You got somebody kind of always checking your blind spots that you're not seeing. And like you said, there's freedom in knowing that you've invited those people that you trust and given them permission, right, to hold that mirror. And then you can move forward because you saw that before it basically, brought you down or destroyed whatever you were working on. So let's shift gears then into what I would consider probably part of your wheelhouse and what you do every day, this other elevation context, how we lift each other's up or other people up. We elevate others, we empower them, we encourage them. We're, I call it, I don't know, kickstand leadership, if you will. We're kind of that kickstand for those folks. Talk about what fires you up about that. And what is that your passion? Would you consider that part of your passion?
I would consider that part of my passion. And it's so funny because, conventional wisdom in the way of the world is counter to that. The culture says, hey, get what you can get. You got to do you. And I've just found so much joy in bringing the potential out of people and the calling out of people. And I believe the reason I have is because somebody did that for me. And on paper, I wasn't the best guy to give a shot to in a lot of scenarios, and somebody saw something in me and fanned that flame. So I think that's a big passion of me. I look for unconventional leaders, unconventional people, and I give and require a high level of loyalty, and that's a gift and a curse. But I just believe when you focus on other people's success more than your own, it just really helps. It helps you to also do what you need to do, because you realize unless you're farther ahead and showing them what to do, you can't fully be a benefit to them. So it is a thing to me. And I think that when I enter into a situation, a speaking engagement, a coaching opportunity, chaplaincy, I've learned to train myself. And I heard John Maxwell say this: how can I add value to this person or this organization? And the receptiveness to that person or organization, when you come from a place of not, hey, I'm going to tell you what I know because you can do it like me, then they'll tune you out. When you say, how can I add value to you as a person and collectively to your organization, the receptiveness is so huge. And I think the reason I get so excited about it is that that's what God's called us to do. That's what he wants us to do. And he knows more of what will make us fulfilled than we do. So I just love that.
To add to what you're saying too, because in a world that's all about, like you said, what's in it for me, and the syndrome of kind of step over people instead of step alongside with them. I would go back to just, again, we go back to what's the truth and what was the truth from the beginning of time. And seed time and harvest is a principle, right? So when you're pouring into others and planting those seeds, God's going to honor that. God's going to reward that. Not that you're doing it for that, but let's face it. We pour into others. He who waters will himself be watered, is what the word says. So, that's not a bad principle to hold on to. And I think if the world, let's be honest, not that I have the solution for all the world's problems, but if everybody just kind of took one step in the direction of sowing a good seed, I think we would all kind of stand back and go, wow, this really does work. God had this figured out long before we did. So, I feel like the world could stand a little more of that. Talk about, as we close up shop here, just talk us a little bit about your company, Asaph Talks, and your role there, and just kind of some of your resources that are available, and some of the impact that you feel like you're making.
Oh, absolutely. And so Asaph Talks is, I named it that because it's Psalm 73 is one of my favorite passages of scripture, and it's written by Asaph, who was one of David's worship leaders. But the reason I love it is because it's so authentic. It's just real talk, real people. He's telling God how he feels. He's no filter. And it was born out of that. I was did Fellowship of Christian Athletes for 10 years, love FCA, loved the organization. Through that time, I just was more compelled to tell my story about some of the things in my past, addiction, mental health, and then began to realize there's such a crossover between addiction and mental health and the sports world, and also in the ministry world, and people weren't talking about it. Mm-hmm. So as opportunities grew, I began to do that, and then launched out full time in February. And what we're doing is evangelism and discipleship, but it's primarily through 4 lanes, which is speaking, writing, mentoring, and chaplaincy. So it's speaking events, churches, organizations, teams, things of that nature. We do weekly devotions that I send out once a week that are very small. So if you're like me with a short attention span, you knock them out in 2 minutes. And also the mentoring, meeting people where they are, and then the chaplaincy. I love coming alongside right now some baseball teams and facilities, just meeting guys where they are. So we're growing. Things are going awesome. My role right now is doing a lot of all of that and looking to get some people in the right places. But on the website, it's just lincolnlawing.com, and then on there's a tab for Asaph Talks, and you can sign up for devotions at the bottom of that and stay in it. But I feel like what I'm excited about is I'm doing what God's called me to do, and it's a unique lane. And but I'm very passionate about when I die, whenever that is. I want to have done something that only Lincoln could have done, not in a selfish way, but what did God create me to do at full potential? And I feel like I'm doing that, and it isn't easy, but it is simple and it is fun, and I'm enjoying the ride so far.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great, man. And it will outlast you. Even I think that's part of the attraction to what we're doing is, man, this writing we're doing or speaking or what, podcasting, that it's going to outlive us, and it's going to be making an impact beyond us. And I think that's cool. So, man, it's been a pleasure getting to know you for a little bit. And I know you're taking a big trip to Alaska, and I appreciate you kind of working with me on my technical difficulties today and getting us in here tonight. But man, it's been a pleasure. And I appreciate your perspective on narrative masculinity and elevation. We're conquering our enemy and doing some YETI hunting along the way. So audience, I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, he's been Lincoln Lawing. We've been Last in Line. Be blessed.